Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. So this is my post-mortem on the United Kingdom's general election, and it really is a post-mortem from the Labour Party's perspective because it has been a truly dreadful result for Labour. In terms of seats, it's their worst result since 1935. In share of the vote, not quite that bad. So anyway, the Conservatives have won, and quite convincingly. So their best result in terms of number of seats since, my goodness, must be since 1992. I'm pretty sure it's better than 2015 in terms of number of seats, and it's better in terms of share of votes. The Conservatives, they exceeded my expectations. And everybody knew the Conservatives were going to win, but I couldn't quite believe it was going to be by so much. So that's that. The Conservatives got 364 members of Parliament. Remember, you need 326 to command a majority. In fact, you could get away with slightly fewer than that, bearing in mind the Speaker doesn't vote and Sinn Féin doesn't turn up, and Sinn Féin's now got 6 MPs who have got that right. So the Labour Party reduced to 203 MPs. Now, 1983 was said to be their annus horribilis, when they got only 209 members of Parliament. It's even worse for them for them now. Remember the glory days of Tony Blair in 1997. He swept to power with 418 MPs. A very far cry from that. Now, Jeremy Corbyn was a constant thorn in his side. Jeremy Corbyn was the most disloyal Labour MP ever in the 120-year history of the party, constantly rebelling against the leadership. Well, he's got his comeuppance, especially when he tried to demand loyalty from his own parliamentary party. Who's the other big winner of the night? Is really the Scottish National Party, who've gained a baker's dozens of seats. They got 45% of the vote. Now, not quite as good as their Westminster result of 2015, but still very creditable again. Bear in mind, the SNP is now the natural party of government north of Hadrian's Wall. They've won 3 Westminster elections on the trot. They've won 3 Holyrood elections on the trot. So they're up to 48 members of Parliament out of 59 members of Parliament in Scotland. Now, the Liberal Democrats is a more mixed picture because they increased their vote share considerably. They had 7.5% last time. Now they've got 11.5%. So that's it. They're up by half. However, they're actually down by members of Parliament from 12 MPs to 11. Remember the last election, they got 12 members of Parliament. But then several people defected. They're up to 18 members of Parliament, former Conservatives and Labour people, moving over to the Liberal Democrats. These defectors to the Lib Dems, they all lost. The Independent Group for Change and Asubri and so on, they all lost. It's also very good news for Boris Johnson, as in most of the few Tory Remainers have gone. They've left the party or they've lost their seats. So it's very good news for him. The Democratic Unionist Party are 2 seats down in Northern Ireland. A few changes there. The SDLP have got 2 seats. The Alliance Party have got 1. So that's that. So this really was the Brexit election. So what won it for the Conservatives? Well, really 2 factors, Brexit and Corbyn. And Brexit was probably the slightly more important of the 2. So Boris Johnson's decision to go for an early election appears to be an inspired choice. Cast your minds back 3 months, and he was in a bind. Boris Johnson was stuck. He'd been effectively boxed in by Labour, the Liberal Democrats, even a few Remainers within his own party, because the Supreme Court had struck down prorogation. Okay, so Parliament had to come back, and he couldn't leave the European Union. They decided that deal, but Parliament was delaying it to the 31st of January. Hello there. One Sky commentator mentioned a historical change in Northern Ireland results. He didn't expand on this. What was it? Well, I don't think it's that much of a major change, but the DUP and the Sinn Féin, the 2 major parties, have both lost a bit of power, partly because there's Stormont, the devolved assembly in Northern Ireland, and that's not been meeting for, my goodness, 2.5 years, because there's been this deadlock, and the Sinn Féin demanding Arlene Foster, the leader of the DUP, go. Well, she was their first minister. The DUP's leader, Nigel Dodds, actually certainly Westminster leader, he represents Belfast North. He's lost a seat to Sinn Féin. John Finucane has taken over, which is obviously a very sweet victory for Sinn Féin. Anything else? The way the Alliance Party have come back in. The Alliance Party got their best result ever. The Alliance Party of Northern Ireland says it's a cross-community party, and it's pro-union rather than unionist, if that makes any sense. So yes, we want to be part of the UK. They also want to be part of the European Union, but they favour good relations with the Republic of Ireland, cooperation. They say that Ireland was divided because communities were divided and not the other way around. And they deliberately alternate their leaders, one Catholic, followed by Protestant, followed by Catholic, followed by Protestant, and so forth. So they're more middle-class party, taking more considered views of things. They're not ones for tub thumping or flag waving. Other thing about the Alliance Party, they used to be getting under 10% of the vote, is that they're really a symbol of the embourgeoisement of Northern Irish society, that they've done quite well. They do better than more prosperous areas of the country. But I remember Tony Blair saying about the Alliance Party, they're totally reasonable people, which is why they never have a chance. But Sinn Féin, they're all about national identity. The DUP likewise, to a less extent the Ulster Unionist Party. So Northern Ireland's got two major unionist parties, the DUP, the bigger one, and the Ulster Unionist Party. Now, previously, the Ulster Unionist Party used to be bigger than the Democratic Unionist Party, but about 15 years ago, the DUP took over as the main one. The thing is, they just need to get together. They ought to amalgamate. There's no point for pointlessly replicating everything, the services and wasting money. They should just unite. There we go. So Sinn Féin and the SDLP, they're both nationalist parties. They both want to take Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom to join the Republic of Ireland and to be part of the European Union. But I mean, they've had this electoral pact. They should possibly get together. So been some changes there. Sinn Féin, they very narrowly held on to Fermanagh, South Tyrone, the most marginal seat in Northern Ireland. So from a Conservative perspective, Corbyn was the gift which just kept on giving. All right, way back in the 80s, he was elected to Parliament in 1983. Corbyn was a backbencher, and as somebody who's going to be a backbencher forever, I went to an event he spoke at, the Oxford Union, and they have these little dispatch boxes on the desk, a bit like you see in the House of Commons, and he quipped, it's nice to get close to the front bench for once. As he was always a backbench Labour MP, he never got to be a spokesman on anything because he was such a pariah within the party. Remember, this is a man who was voted against by 80% of his own members of Parliament. People who work with him every day, who know him best, they can't abide the fellow. So he was consistently rated less popular than his party. When his party was on about 30% of the polls, he was on about 20% of the polls. He was dragging them down. You need a leader to pull you up, someone like Blair or indeed like Johnson. You know, Boris Johnson's appeal goes well beyond natural Tory voters. People who wouldn't otherwise consider voting for him like him. He's affable. He's really a gust of humour. He's endlessly resourceful, creative. In some ways, he's a communication genius, a classical scholar with a lot of low cunning. I've met him a few times. Now, I wouldn't trust him as far as I could punch him. He's a pathological liar. I still wanted the Conservatives to win. And that's that. Corbyn, for all his faults, he doesn't lie that much. There was this stupid lie he told about he couldn't find a seat on the train and the footage from the train showed otherwise, things like that. Corbyn obviously is quite hypocritical, owning a house, being quite an acquisitive capitalist, despite being a scourge of capitalism. There's also get Brexit done. As I say, way back in September, the Conservatives were stuck. They couldn't go forwards, they couldn't go backwards, they couldn't leave the EU, they couldn't get an early election. So it seemed. They didn't want another referendum, but then it worked because then Labour and the Lib Dems in late November were persuaded to finally vote for an early election. Remember that the Fixed Terms Parliament Act 2010, parliaments last for 5 years, and you can't call an early one unless 2/3 of the House of Commons votes for a dissolution of Parliament. There was talk of some sort of parliamentary coup, of voting him out, of a motion of no confidence, Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, the minor parties, and a few Tory Remainers, and bringing in a caretaker prime minister, some interim leader, someone who people could unite around, Ken Clarke or Harriet Harman. You don't see Labour ever recovering this finished. It will be a generation before they get majority again. I think a bit too pessimistic. In share of the vote, they're down to 32% of the vote. Now, that's worse than last time when they got 40% of the vote. It's worse than 2015 when they got 35% of the vote under Ed Miliband. It's better than 1983 when they got 27% of the vote. Is better than 2010 when they got 28% of the vote. They're on 32% of the vote. But, you know, this is Labour's own stupid fault and the Lib Dems. In March, we could have had Brexit. The deadline was 31st of March. The deal was there with Theresa May. If they'd let that through, instead of insisting on an extension to October, we would have been out of the European Union. We would have avoided leaving, a hard Brexit, leaving without a deal. That would have been that. We could have moved on to other issues. If there was an election now, Labour and the Lib Dems would have done better. Well, the Lib Dems are probably about the same. They pitched themselves as the ultra Remain party. The trouble for Labour is they were all over the place. They're trying to be all things to all people. It was tricky. It was a more nuanced policy. I know there's a certain logic to it, but a lot of people are a bit simple-minded. Um, anyway, we would have been out of that, and they could have won an election and actually asked to come back in. The United Kingdom was leaving. It invoked Article 50 of the Treaty of Lisbon, but that says obviously any member state can leave any time, but also says having left, you're allowed to apply for readmission. Doesn't guarantee a member state would be allowed back in, might become in on less favourable terms, but a future Labour and or Lib Dem government could have tried to get the United Kingdom back in. So they delayed Brexit, and they went for this early election. They could have not delayed Brexit, or they could have not gone for this early election. But they really screwed up. I mean, Labour's history is strewn with huge strategic blunders. I shan't go into all of them. Now, the Conservatives tried to almost match Labour's spending pledges. So a lot of this is funny money. A lot of the electoral pledges, I simply don't believe. People throw them around like confetti. The Conservatives are going to bring in 50,000 more nurses. Ha, ha, ha. Where are you going to magic them out of? Because the NHS is in all serious trouble. 100,000 staff short in the NHS. It's the third biggest employer in the world. 10,000 doctors short, 40,000 nurses short, 50,000 nurses have left the National Health Service in the past 10 years. That's excluding retired, excluding those struck off, excluding those who've died, have chosen to leave nursing and do other jobs. All right? And that's a truly dreadful result. They're not being replaced at anything like that rate. Likewise, doctors. People from the European Union less inclined to come here than before. Since Brexit, immigration in the EU has slowed down very considerably. People from Commonwealth countries, India in particular, who used to be a lot of NHS staff, they're less inclined to come. India's a more prosperous country. There are other places they're minded to go to. So there's a crisis on our hands. Do you think there are more restrictions on those who can stand an election? Here in Pompey, we had a something drug dealer standing as independent. No, I don't agree with that, actually. If people want to vote for a criminal, they should be allowed to vote for a criminal. That's that. Anyway, so this manifesto, Labour's manifesto, I think wasn't dreadful, actually. It contained some policies which are appealing to me as a Conservative. People say, I remember the 1983 manifesto famously described by Labour MP Gerald Kaufman as the longest suicide note in history. Well, you couldn't say that about this one. But they were supposed to try to weaponise the NHS, as Ed Miliband so notoriously said 4 years ago when he was Labour leader. And there was that photo, well, actually a journalist came up with this, of a child who was forced to sleep on the floor of a hospital ward because there were no beds for him. Now, Boris Johnson really mishandled that gaffe. Fortunately for the Conservatives, it came so late in the campaign, it had almost no impact. Everyone should be able to redeem themselves. Well, exactly. I think, do we believe in rehabilitation or not? I do. There should be a path of forgiveness. I'm not naive. I think that, not everyone is going to be rehabilitated. But do you want a criminal to get better or not? I want them to improve. We've got to have a chance to improve. We shouldn't be foolish trusting them too much, saying a fraudster, oh, you can have a job in the bank. But you should be able to work it off. Anyway, but Labour's position on Brexit is quite convoluted, saying, okay, what we're going to do, hello there, John Doe, is that we will go to Brussels and try and get a new deal of the European Union. The European Union might say, swivel on it, because they are sick of this after 3.5 years. Or if they did get a deal from the European Union, it might be less advantageous than the one there is at the moment, and it would delay things by at least 6 months, hold another referendum on it, and Labour would campaign against that deal they just negotiated, which obviously would be an incentive for the European Union to make that deal as dreadful as possible, and then Labour would be campaigning for Remain. So the whole thing is we need to settle this Brexit issue. I mean, I'm just sick of it. Even though I'm a leaver, I'm so fed up of it. Sometimes I say, shall we just Remain, just to have it done, because I can't face it anymore. My friends in business say, all this indecision is terrible for us. We're in stasis. You voted Brexit Party, did you? Well, that was a real non-event of the night, because Brexit Party a few months ago was something like 7% in the polls, and they rather underperformed. Then the crucial thing was about a month ago when they announced that they would not be standing in any Conservative-held seats. So they seem to be not taking this seriously, and therefore they've polled far less well than people had originally imagined. So that's that. The number of women elected is at a historic high as well. So the UKIP, the other hardline Eurosceptic party, has more or less disappeared. You wouldn't mind if we left out of the deal. You can't cut a price of democracy. I don't want to leave without a deal, but I would do that rather than Remain. There we are. So it depends what deal we have. I mean, Boris Johnson's deal, I don't think is a great one, but I would go for it. Anyway, so the Brexit Party might have cost the Tories a couple of seats, but were not the real fly in the ointment from the Conservative perspective. People thought they might have been. So the Conservatives had a fairly simple message: well, get Brexit done. That was it. The mantra endlessly and ruthlessly repeated. Because that attracted some people who would not otherwise vote Conservatives, who were sometimes quite committed Labour supporters, because they were fed up with this. They felt disrespected by the Labour Party, which would not listen to their voice. There was that clear mandate 3.5 years ago. Leave, that's it, it's settled. And everybody said, we'll accept the result and we'll implement it. Every other referendum result in the United Kingdom ever has always been implemented. So implement this one. Anyway, the thing is, the Tory simplicity is decidedly misleading. There's still a bit of negotiation to be done on trade, even after 31st of January, trying to rework things with the EU and with other countries. The Northern Ireland situation, how there's this regulatory alignment with the EU. So the Liberal Democrats, they position themselves as the extreme Remain party. Revoke Article 50, that's it, unconditionally, send the European Union forever. Okay, that's got clarity to it. It's easily comprehensible. And they thought, 48% of people vote Remain. We can hoover up all of those. Okay, they're not going to, but quite a lot. Opinion polls show up to 55% of people would now vote Remain. If you get a big chunk of that, you're doing very well. Certainly better than the 7-point-something% they got 2.5 years ago in the last Westminster election. But okay, they went up in the polls, but not very much, partly because Labour had such a dreadful leader. So Jo Swinson rather underperformed. She's the youngest leader of a Westminster party. She's only 39. She's the only lady to lead a party which campaigned out the whole of Great Britain, but she performed kind of dismally. She should have done a lot better. And indeed, she lost her seat. Goody Two-Shoes was voted out in Dunbartonshire East. Do you think the less we are punished, the more likely other countries are to leave? Well, I think that's it. You're on the money. I mean, hit the nail on the head. Brussels' idea is they've got to make an example of the British. If Brexit is seen to be a rip-roaring success, the Danes, who've got a strong Eurosceptic caucus, will say, why don't we leave too? And other countries will say, well, why are we paying in? The prosperous countries like the Netherlands or whoever, or Sweden, and then the Germans will say, why are we paying for this? Do you think the accusations of anti-Semitism were smears are true? I think they're largely smears. I mean, I loathe Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think he's anti-Semitic. Okay, he sometimes hung around with people who are anti-Semitic, but a lot of it's overblown just because he's a strong critic of Israeli government policy. Anyway, so, and there's still Jewish people who are in the Labour Party. It's not like they've expelled people from the Labour Party. I mean, people call anything racist these days. John Bercow, Speaker of the House of Commons, former Conservative Jewish chap, he says he doesn't think Corbyn's anti-Semitic. So I don't know, or I don't think he's ever said or done which is anti-Semitic. Anyway, so remember Jo Swinson a month ago hilariously said she was going to be Prime Minister. Ha, ha, ha. Prime Minister of your own drawing room, perhaps. So it's even worse than 1983 at the Llandudno conference of the Liberal Party. David Steele's much mocked statement, go home and prepare for government. I remember in 2001, what's-his-face, Boris Johnson, when the Conservatives lost heavily, said, go home and prepare for breakfast. Let's get Brexit done. And then this time he said, let's get breakfast done, when he was returned in Uxbridge and Ruislip. That's his constituency. So the Labour Party is third in Scotland again. In 1959, Labour got the most seats in Scotland. They remained the biggest party in Scotland up to the 2015 election. And now they've been the third party in Scotland again. Trying to stop Brexit cost her dearly. Well, I don't agree. From the Liberal Democrats, is probably a fairly good strategy. I mean, 12% of the vote is not that good for them. They got 23% of the vote under what's his name, Nick Clegg. If the Unionists had lost the 1973 Irish vote, would the government have ignored that vote? They would have ignored the Brexit part. Well, I don't think they would have done, but the Unionists got like 98% of the vote in Northern Ireland to stay part of the United Kingdom. That's partly because nationalists boycotted it. There was a 59% turnout, so there's no doubt it was an absolute majority wanting Northern Ireland to stay within the UK. So Labour's third in Scotland again, a truly dreadful result for them. It's hard to believe that until 4 years ago they had the lion's share of the vote in Caledonia. They're now reduced to only one seat. Obviously, they're doing better in South Britain than in North Britain in share of the vote. That's because the SNP is becoming the natural party of government in Scotland. Wales is the only section of the United Kingdom where Labour is still the strongest. Maybe it's because they're giving loads of money to immigrants who just landed with 8 kids. Well, the Labour government's not actually in government, so they can't do that. I mean, maybe local councils are. I mean, Labour's pitched themselves as very pro-immigration. I mean, I'm somewhat pro-immigration, depends how much. It's quantity and quality. I don't think it's a bad person to be an immigrant, but we need to have some sort of control on it. Anyway, Labour had some policies I thought were good. Abolish Ofsted, the Office of Standards and Education, where there is much joy in heaven over every sinner who repenteth. Because when Labour were in government, they were bureaucratist like crazy. It was just over-regulation on steroids. And they've finally seen the light, thank goodness, to get rid of SATs, all these exams that little children have to face almost every year, stressing them out, taking away from actual learning. So a few decent policies from Labour. Anyway, so the Liberal Democrats, they've only got 11 seats, and Ed Davey, he was defeated by Joe Swinson to be leader of the Lib Dems just a few months ago, but sweet revenge for him because he's now acting leader. She can't be leader of the Liberal Democrats, she doesn't have a seat, might be out of politics completely. There's no guarantee she'll win in East Dunbartonshire next time, even though she lost quite narrowly. But the Lib Dems, they did well in Twickenham, a previously held seat. They got over 50% of the vote. They did very well in Richmond. I knew the Liberal Democrats were going to retake Richmond and Kingston North. I thought the Liberal Dems would win by 2,000 seats there. They won by 7,500 seats, unseating Zach Goldsmith, the Conservative. Kingston upon Thames, the Liberal Democrats have won there. So strangely, over a quarter of the Lib Dem seats are in one section of London, southwest London. Do you agree with any Labour policies? Well, I just told you one I agreed with. Yes, I do. So anyway, we've seen what's happened in Northern Ireland, down north being gained by the Alliance, as the rich seat in Northern Ireland, Foyle being gained by the SDLP. Foyle's where Derry is, but they chose to name after the city to avoid having to call the seat Derry or Londonderry. So, unionists just need to amalgamate. So the vote shares are largely as I predicted. The Conservatives got a bit more than I thought. Labour got what I thought. The Scottish National Party got a tiny bit better than I thought. I thought they're going to get 40%. In Scotland, they got 45%, and so on. So Corbyn's immediately said he's going to stand down. I mean, some people said to me that he is so crazy he would try and stay again. But, I mean, he was really a lamentable choice for Labour. And everybody said it. Every pundit in the business said, no, not going to work. But would the Labour grassroots people listen? Oh, no. No, they wouldn't. And he led them to one defeat. You have one chance. You rejected by the people, you've got to go. He led them to defeat again. I'm in Ireland for Christmas. No, I'm not. You're inviting me? Jeremy's a good view on the justice system. Priti Patel wants to kill random people. Okay, so you might agree with Jeremy Corbyn, but do you not agree that he is a vote loser? Even if you think his opinions are delightful, your job as leader of the opposition is to become Prime Minister, right? Is to lead your party into government, okay? He failed that mission dismally. Didn't come close. Worse this time than last time. Conservatives, they also took social media much more seriously this time than last time, were much savvier about that, because the Conservatives were given a serious fright in 2017, because Labour was much more astute in making the most of social media. Anyway, so the Green Party didn't stand in quite a few places. They kept their one seat in Brighton. They're not near to gaining any others, which I think is a pity. So yeah, Labour's quite strong in Wales. So the Conservatives have taken back some seats in Northern England, in traditionally Labour-held areas where Tories have not sat for these seats for decades, not since the 1930s in some places. I think IDS should replace Boris in a few years. We need someone with power, presence, gravitas, and sex appeal. Well, whatever else you can say, I don't think Ian Duncan Smith has got sex appeal. So the thing is, you just accept Brexit, move forward. Like in 6 weeks, it should all be over. The United Kingdom out of the European Union, and finally is done and dusted. Now, the thing is, the Conservatives had these two major advantages of Brexit and Corbyn, as I pointed out, which will not pertain next time. And next time, obviously, Labour got a much better chance. It can't really be a worse chance. They could talk about the NHS, about education, about income inequality, about the environment, and so forth. So the Conservatives just won 4 elections on the trot. Now, admittedly, 2010, it was narrowly, had to have Liberal Democrats as coalition partners. 2017, again, it was a minority government and needed confidence and supply from the Democratic Unionist Party. Yeah, what's his face? Jeremy Corbyn is a loser. The media smear him and then he cried. Well, the thing is, Jeremy Corbyn, he was just a protester. He shouldn't have been an MP. He wanted to be on the streets protesting. You've got to be a party of government. And I know he did quite well in 2017, but this time he lost. So he really didn't pass the Downing Street test. Can you see him on the steps to Downing Street? If you close your eyes and you picture him there, waving on the steps of 10 Downing Street, about to go as Prime Minister, Are you comfortable with that image? And very few people are. And they had this ludicrously self-contradictory policy on defence. They were going to retain Trident, that's nuclear weapons, but Corbyn would never ever use it because he's got a principled objections to using nuclear weapons even in self-defence. Talking about cutting the defence budget even more, talking about leaving NATO. Look, put it this way. The British Army had about 75,000 soldiers. It's tiny, smaller than it was in the mid-18th century, when the population was a tenth of what it is now. You might say, but there was the empire in the 18th century. Okay, obviously the world population was much smaller in the 18th century. It was like not even a billion. And yes, the empire existed, but it was a few ports on the coast of India. The East India Company had its own separate army. In America, it was largely militia did it, not the British Army very much. So the British Army has been cut and cut and cut the armed forces. Corbyn should move to Moscow. Well, indeed, North Korea. So there we are. I'm going to choose a new Labour leader. I'm going to be rash. Here's a fool's errand guessing. I'm going to say Sir Keir Starmer. It's got to be somebody credible, seen as moderate, affable. Corbyn, he doesn't seem that dislikable as an individual. Jo Swinson actually comes across as quite affable, and she's quite hot, bit of a MILF, but she's out of politics now. Little goody two-shoes, there she is, sent packing. Very glad to see the beast of Bolsover, Dennis Skinner, that grizzled Labour MP in his 80s to be voted out. David Lammy wants a job. He'd be quite a credible candidate. Chuku Umunna, if he stayed in Labour, he could have got it. He's out of Parliament. I haven't seen Luciana Berger, who stood for the Liberal Democrats. Did she make it? I suspect not, actually. Didn't gain it eventually in the end, because that would have been reported the most Jewish constituency in the UK, but the Jewish community is still a minority there. She's a Jewish lady who represented a Liverpool constituency, and she left Labour because she was sickened about anti-Semitism. So much to say. Labour's really been pushed into metropolitan Britain, into areas like Newcastle, Manchester, Birmingham, London seats, and very little outside that. So they've been pushed back into their heartlands. In order to get into government next time, they would have to gain 123 seats, 123 in one election. I just don't think it's doable. Therefore, we could have Conservative government for the next 10 years. People are absolutely fed up of elections, 3 elections in 4 years. So I think the Conservatives will go whole 5 years to the next one. Anyway, the only way Labour can get into government next time is if there's a coalition between them and the SNP, possibly the Liberal Democrats. There's so few. So that's that. A quite decisive victory for the Conservative Party. Labour needs to have a total rethink. I'm surprised that Plaid Cymru didn't gain a more there. So the Brexit Party is going to go. Probably be wound up within a year, because obviously as of January there'll be no in the European Parliament. They've got nobody in Parliament in the UK. Then they've got any local councillors. They've got nobody in any devolved assembly, I don't think. So that's that. Their raison d'etre will be dealt with. It'll be over. So that's that. In some ways a quite uninspiring election which happened. A few upsets. The exit polls were very accurate, actually. Was it wise for Boris to trade London for the North long time? Good question. Well, neither of them are particularly conservative areas. Conservatives are most strongest in the countryside of southern England. I don't know. I suppose London just wasn't winnable because of Brexit, whereas Northern England was. And the Conservatives made considerable gains in Northern England in areas which were not usually Conservative. Jacob Rees-Mogg remained leader of the House of Commons, I would expect so. So I should be elated. It's quite a good result. And finally get Brexit out of the way, and I'm just absolutely fed up of talking about it. And once it's done, it'll be quite difficult to reverse. So people say, we don't want to hear about it from Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and they'll just have to accept it. The thing is, the SNP, they got how many seats is it now? They didn't quite get 50. They were on, I'm trying to think, they were on 37, they're up to 40 something, is that right? Up to 40. So they're very good news for them. The Tories have lost quite a few seats in Scotland. Tories down to 6 seats, if I got that correct. So now they're going to say we have to have a second referendum on the partition of the United Kingdom. Let's not call it independence. SNP are against independence. They want to be part of the European Union. If you're in the EU, you're not independent. You might say it's splendid to be in the EU. You could believe that, but you can't say you're independent. Well, that would be a lie if you did. So I think Boris Johnson's got to say a very firm no, at least try and delay it as much as possible. What goes up must come down. The SNP's popularity must dip. Allow Labour to recover in Scotland a little bit. Good thing the SNP didn't get over 50 seats, because what her name said, Ruth Davidson, that former Conservative Unionist leader in Scotland, that if the SNP got over 50 seats, she would swim naked in Loch Ness, and I really don't want to see it. I think everyone can acknowledge that Ruth Davidson is not body beautiful. Okay, that's everything from me. So please follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, George from Ireland. Donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. You're very welcome, Milady Manners, or indeed on Patreon. Book online lessons with me in politics, in religious studies, in history, in English as a foreign language, in English literature, and so forth. I translate from French, Spanish, Italian, German, Romanian, and Russian. Edit documents. I'll be your tour guide in London. Online lessons with me, or indeed in-person lessons if you're in London. That's my psephological study and my musing about this election. Okay, goodbye.